I want to thank all of you for joining ACC today for what you thought was a hidden history of Sacramento women's food story with just myself. However, we changed it up a bit, and I really want to thank ACC for being willing to be so flexible. Instead, we have a group of women that are part of a group we now call Alter Egos: Delta Mello, Haley Clark, Angela James, Christy Brazil, and Carol Goodman. And we're going to be sharing the stories of 5 really remarkable women. Luzina Stanley Wilson, a pioneer cook in Sacramento during the gold rush. Miss Suzanne Tracy, a cookery instructor at the turn of the 20th century. Audrey Dunlap, the hostess of an exclusive and very pink restaurant in Oak Park during the 30s. She'll be joining us in just a few minutes. Katherine K. Sinclair, who was really a leader in the farm to fork movement in Jackson long before Alice Waters from Berkeley. And Antonina De Castro, who was a teacher working her way through college as a waitress in Italian restaurants in the 70s. When I told you when I pitched this program to ACC, I proposed a quite different talk. What I like to do is the stories of quite everyday people who aren't particularly exceptional, but whose story connects us to the past, the community, and ourselves. I especially like food stories compiled from diaries, journals, newspaper accounts, personal narratives, and interviews. Some of this started with a project that I did with Elaine Korn, who's married to David Suhu, who you've seen often here, that was called We Are Where We Eat. This was a project with Capitol Public Radio and the Sacramento Public Library. However, I just couldn't face another hour in front of a camera with no studio audience by myself, so I asked the wonderful cast assembled to bring these stories to life. When our performance is over, we'll demonstrate how to make Sephardic chicken soup with lemon and suggest some variations: Chinese chicken flour soup, Greek avoglamono soup, and agrestata, an ethereal light accompaniment to chicken or vegetables. And now, the Alter Egos. In the spring of 1849, Luzina and Mason Wilson packed their wagon and drove west from their log cabin on the Missouri frontier with their two young sons. Like 25,000 other Americans that year, the Wilson family was headed overland to California to seek gold. As a woman, Luzina Wilson would find herself a rarity in the adventure that lay ahead. It was almost dusk of the last day of September 1849. Oh, I'm sorry.
It was almost dusk on the last day of September in 1849 when we reached Sacramento and the end of our long journey. My poor, tired babies were asleep on quilts in the bottom of the wagon, and I peered out into the gathering gloom, trying to catch a glimpse of our destination. The night before, I had cooked my supper on the campfire, as usual, when a hungry miner, attracted by the unusual sight of a woman, said to me, "I'll give you $5, ma'am, for them biscuit." Well, that sounded like a fortune to me, and I looked at him to see if he meant it. And as I hesitated at such, to me, a very remarkable proposition, he repeated his offer to purchase and said he would give $10 for bread made by a woman, and laid the shining gold piece in my hand. I then made more biscuit for my family and told my husband of my good fortune and put the precious coin away as a nest egg for the wealth we were to gain. In my dreams that night, I saw crowds of bearded miners striking gold from the earth with every blow of the pick, and each one seeming to leave a share for me. Well, the next day, when I looked for my treasure, it was gone. The little box where I had put it rolled empty on the bottom of the wagon, and my coin now lay hidden in the dust miles back up on the mountains. So we arrived, young, strong, healthy, hopeful, but penniless, into the new world. All around us twinkled the campfires of the new arrivals. A wilderness of canvas tents glimmered in the firelight. The men cooked and ate, played cards, drank whiskey, slept rolled up in their blankets, fed their teams, talked, and swore all around. And a few, less occupied than their comrades, stared at me as at a strange creature, and roused my sleeping babies, which they passed from arm to arm, having a look at such a novelty as a child. We halted in an open space, and lighting our fire in their midst made us one with the inhabitants of Sacramento. Well, Mason immediately went about the business of finding gold. Upon his return, he saw 2 campfires at a row of plank tables that had not been there when he departed. Sat 20 dining miners. Mason spotted me across the furthest fire, pouring hot coffee into an elderly Chilean man's tin cup. And as we lay in bed that night, I told him that I had 3 seatings of men that came for dinner that evening. Each man paid $1 whole for the meal, and I expected them all to return for breakfast and dinner tomorrow and the following days that followed. Oh. Well, one morning, an official of the town stopped at my fire and said in his pompous way, "Madam, I want a good, substantial breakfast and cooked by a woman." I asked him what he would have, and he gave his order: 2 onions, 2 eggs, a beefsteak, and a cup of coffee. He ate it, thanked me, and gave me $5. Now, the sum seems large now for such a meal, but then it was much above cost. And if I had asked for $10, he would have paid for it. Now, after 2 or 3 days in Sacramento, we sold our oxen, and with the proceeds of $600, we bought an interest in the hotel and kept in one of the wooden houses, a 1.5-story building, which stood on what is now known as K Street near 6th Street. Dirt-covered men lined up outside our hotel, and the next morning, word traveled fast that there was a woman with domestic skills in Sacramento. It was a motley crowd that gathered every day at my table, but always at my coming, the loud voices were hushed, the swearing ceased, the quarrels stopped, and respect was as readily and heartily tendered me as if I had been a queen. Well, I was soon serving up 200 boarders a week, charging each $25, and could afford the establishment of a true building with a roof and more tables and employees. Sourcing the ingredients, however, remained my largest challenge. My first purchase was a quart of molasses for $1 and a slice of salt pork as large as my hand for the same price. Oh, that pork was an experience. When it went into the pan, it was as innocent-looking pork as I ever saw. But no sooner did it touch the fire than it pranced, it sizzled, it frothed all over the pan, it sputtered and crackled and acted as if it were possessed. When finally it subsided, there was a shaving the size of $1 left. The pork had completely vanished into smoke. I found that many of our purchases were deceptive, for the long trip around the Horn was not calculated to improve an article which was probably inferior in quality when it left New York to begin with. The butter was brown with age and spent a year on the way out to California, and the flour we used, oh, it was often soured. From a single sieve, I once sifted out a handful of long black worms. Oh. Well, one afternoon in late December 1849, after days of heavy rain, we were cooking supper in Sacramento when I heard the cry, "The levees broke!" We and the children ran up to the top floor of the hotel and stayed there for 17 days as the floodwaters lapped outside. Our business was ruined. Well, we packed up and we moved to the rough mining camp of Nevada City. We opened another hotel and called it El Dorado. With a full table at every meal, we had $10,000 invested in the business within 6 months. 9 months later, a fire swept through Nevada City. El Dorado burned to the ground, taking with it our fortune once again. Well, we then moved toward the coast and settled beneath an oak tree in a little valley called Vaca, named after the property's California owner. I etched Wilson's Hotel on a board and made chairs of stumps. Guests slept behind a hay bale, Mason farmed, and we prospered once again. And as time went on, the area became more and more populated, and we became substantial landowners. Well, in 1872, my husband Mason abruptly abandoned us all and moved to Texas. I remained in Vacaville until 1877, when 2 fires devastated my property. I then moved to San Francisco, where I spent the rest of my life, residing in the Hotel Pleasanton, living off real estate transactions, and letting others cook for me.
Thank you, Luzina. So it was almost impossible to get the stories of women at this time, but thankfully Luzina actually kept a journal and wrote a diary that was published, and that's how we were able to get her story. Now, Miss Tracy. By the late 1870s, James McClatchy, who was editor of the Sacramento Bee, started advocating for cooking schools for young Sacramento women. In fact, he was one of the first ones in the country to do so. As the Industrial Revolution was taking off and a series of depressions took hold, there were less and less servants available to take care of food responsibilities. So he thought it prudent that young women learn to cook as well as to sew, keep house, and tend to the children themselves. The Sacramento Bee began hiring young women and cooks from the community to do specials to the Bee. They weren't regular columnists quite yet, and trying to best its competitor, the Sacramento Union. The Sacramento Union had long been an advocate for the pure food movement, helping to pass the first pure food laws in the country. We literally had the first one in 1849. They underwrote an annual pure food exhibition for almost 20 years. Editorials accusing the Sacramento Bee of not participating because the pure food exhibition didn't advertise in its pages. This is one of the Sacramento Bee's responses.
The Bee has declined to throw its columns wide open to the Pure Food exhibition for the reason that it is nothing more nor less than a fairly cleverly engineered advertising scheme for certain brands of proprietary articles. This fact was very ingeniously concealed at first, but it has gradually been coming out into the broad light of day, and yesterday the lecture on bread and biscuit by Miss Tracy was an advertisement pure and simple of a particular brand of baking powder. Our innocent neighbor across the way has fallen into the trap with both feet. And this morning it gave a long account of the lecture wherein the baking powder comes in for 3 distinct, prominent, and palpable advertisements coming from the lips of a woman who is probably in the employ of the baking powder company. The Record Union should put on its spectacles and not permit this clever scheme to pull the wool over their eyes.
Nevertheless, in 1897, they decided to sponsor this same woman, Suzanne Tracy, in partnership with the Sacramento Young Women's Christian Temperance Union. And they did accept advertisement for companies like John Bruner, who advertised their collections of wooden wares, steel rangers, refrigerators, and the like.
The Young Women's Christian Temperance Union has secured the lower hall of Pythian Castle for its cooking school, which will be under charge of Miss Tracy, and applicants to which should be in by Thursday next. The women's meeting on Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock will be led by the president of the association, Dr. M.M. Kroner-Miller. Any information in regard to the class will be cheerfully answered at YWCA rooms, corner 8 and I Street. Miss Tracy is a disciple of Emma P. Ewing, who has sought to pioneer the teaching of home economics after the Civil War. Ewing was called the woman who would have taught America to make good bread if America could be taught. She is also as a graduate of the Minneapolis Cooking School and the author of a cookbook called 12 Lessons in Scientific Cookery.
In 1909, both newspapers recognized that women were now purchasing the newspaper for news about cooking and other domestic arts. In lieu of articles, it would run advertisements that looked like stories side by side along display ads from the Sacramento Electric, Gas, and Railway Company, and local appliance and department stores that promoted Miss Tracy's Summer School of Cooking.
Sacramento Bee. July 23, 1909. Sacramento ladies will welcome the good news that a summer school of cooking is to be opened here next week. Miss Suzanne Tracy, the well-known lecturer and demonstrator of the culinary art, will give a series of lectures. Miss Tracy has been conducting schools this year in Fresno, San Jose, and Santa Rosa, and each lesson has attracted large and enthusiastic audiences. The lady is so well known in her profession that little need to be said to herald her coming. She is a graduate teacher from New York and will no doubt expound the mysteries of cookery according to the latest scientific principles. The astonishing fact about the school is that the lessons are to be free. The Sacramento Electric, Gas, and Railway Company have arranged to have Miss Tracy come here and give a course in cooking. Miss Tracy will instruct in all branches of cookery, including soups, salads, bread and cake making, pies, cooking of meats, and various kinds of desserts. She will, at her lessons, use a gas range and will explain how to regulate the heat to best receive the best results from the least expenditure of fuel. While these lessons have been arranged primarily for gas consumers, we extend a cordial invitation to all ladies to take advantage of the instruction by attending the classes. Announcement will be made later as to the place where the school will be and the time of the lectures. The Sacramento Union of 23 July 1909. Miss Tracy is not unknown to the Sacramento ladies. She having lectured here some years ago at an exposition held in the Armory and later conducted at a school for the YWCA of the city. Since teaching here, Miss Tracy has traveled much and taught in nearly all the large cities of the coast. She has also visited the East and has been to the Hawaiian Islands, and everywhere has made a success of her work. By her pleasing manner and lucid instruction, she has earned a well-merited reputation as a teacher of ability. Her first visit here is well remembered by many housewives who still quote Miss Tracy as an authority in cooking and who will no doubt gladly welcome her on her return. Sacramento Bee, August 4th, 1909. The first of the series of 10 lectures to be given here by Miss Suzanne Tracy, which was given Wednesday afternoon at 426 K Street, drew such many ladies that it may be necessary to secure larger quarters for the lectures. The large room has been filled up with a kitchen in one end which contained gas ranges and all the necessary appliances for baking. Miss Tracy took her subject, cakes and icing, and gave a very instructive and interesting lecture on the making of cake and icing. The lecture was illustrated by the lecturer who made a cake, baked it, and then after making the icing, iced it in the presence of her audience. Miss Tracy is a lady of charming personality. She thoroughly understands her work and enters it with enthusiasm. Every afternoon this week, she will lecture, taking various subjects each day to give the housekeepers of Sacramento a good opportunity to secure valuable pointers on cooking.
The success of programs like Miss Tracy's were an indication to the local newspapers that the women of Sacramento were eager to learn about more than cookery. Both the Sacramento Bee and Sacramento Union began to expand their offerings on fashion, interior design, gardening, and other issues that appealed to women, introducing the women's pages into the newspapers by the early 1920s. She created another book for those last classes in 1909. I have one of only 3 copies that still exist. However, she suddenly has gained in popularity, and there are revisions of both of her books and available, I hate to admit, on Amazon. And now, Audrey Dunlap. So I want you to close your eyes and imagine that you're standing out on the front porch of an aging home in Oak Park, painted a bright pink. Try to rekindle the savory smells and taste a bit of the history inside, or at least an ample serving of the place. When you open them, you'll meet Audrey Dunlap, who will cordially invite you to sit at her family's tables. Visitors are advised to bring a healthy appetite for the past.
My mother, Annie Louise, she just loved the color pink. So the house was painted pink, pink inside and out. Back then, in the 1930s, you can only imagine the sight of this pink house in Oak Park. It was like a ball of cotton candy with a roof. Pink, with a delectable smell of smothered chicken emanating from it. People came from all over Sacramento to Dunlap's dining room. On a Sunday afternoon, you could see a row of rounded blue sedans parked on the street, and the young trees that were just beginning to give shade. You could see well-dressed folks walking up to this spacious porch. People came not just to eat, but to visit. Entire families would come and mingle with other families in the dining room. We served to a mostly white folk. You know, the black population in Sacramento was too small to maintain a viable business in the 30s, and because of the social situation at the time. An integrated dining room was totally out of the question. My dad wanted to make money and be successful. We were open 6 days a week, closed on Mondays when we hosted our neighbors and friends. We were listed in the Green Book, and we had lots of contact with Black travelers. We were also closed during the annual run of the State Fair in September, which at that time was just down the street from the restaurant. My father ran several concession stands at the State Fair, so we couldn't manage the restaurant and the stands at the same time. I remember the low oak bureau that served as a reservation desk. The cloakroom was one of the bedrooms upstairs. Patrons could wait for their tables out in the back garden. The tablecloths were white, the curtains shallow green. The chairs were upholstered in yellow vinyl. Everything else was pink, soft and soothing. There were no printed menus in Dunlap Dining Room in all of its 38 years. The newspapers might say we only offered 3 entrees, smothered chicken, baked ham, and T-bone steak. But we served plain fried chicken too, for those fussy people who didn't like sauce on their chicken. And on Fridays, we served fish. My father was the cook. My mother, Anna Louise, prepared the salads and the dessert. They called me the hostess. But I did everything but cook. I was a good hostess. People loved me. I did a lot of table hopping. I made sure some of the folks would call me when they got home. With others, I would sit down and visit. Sometimes they would stay so long, I had to send them home, as we were tired. We wanted to go to bed. My father got his start in the food business as a chef in a dining car. Later, he operated the dining concessions for the old Sacramento Northern Railroad, as well as the ferries crossing the Carquines and Benicia Straits. I did my share of shows at the ferry snack bar when I was a young girl. Then he and my mother started Dunlap's Dining Room at 626 J Street. He was still working for the railroad, so my mother pretty much ran the catering company. Later, they closed and operated Dunlap's at the Capitol Hotel. So you could really say that Dunlap's really started in 1917, when the family ran 3 places at once: Dunlap's Cafeteria, the State Fairgrounds, and the other 2 places. My dad worked. He never had time to play with me or my younger sister, Doris. I was born and raised in the pink house. I was married in the back garden of that pink house to Eugene Wilcox, who was a railroad postal supervisor. I spent all my working life behind that oak reservation desk at that pink house. My father retired in 1968 at 86 years old. I retired too, to help him care for my mother, who died in 1969. Then I took care of my father, as well as my husband, who had worked for 40 years before he died. I can still recall every original neighbor on the block, can still see the family home in its first blush of pink, I can appoint the place in my mind right down to the napkins. I can see the customers walking up the porch. I can visualize Dunlaps as though it were yesterday.
Thank you very much, Audrey. If you want to know more about the Dunlaps and Audrey, Audrey was very generous and not only donated the house to the city, but everything to the Center for Sacramento History. And there's now an Airbnb. It was a children's home, a children's development center. So if you've got the cash and the inclination, you can cook some of those recipes that you want and have a party. Now I want to talk a little bit about Katherine K. Sinclair. When I started visiting the Mother Lode in the early 1970s, the culinary scene was rooted in simple fare with fine dining options few and far between. Wine lists were just listed on the back of menus with carafe options for House Chablis and Burgundy. For special dining, Amador County had the Argonaut Inn in Jackson, and Sutter Creek had the Pelargonium. Both were really becoming known as destination restaurants and were owned and operated by women, again, a rarity at the time. Katherine K. Sinclair was the proprietor of the Argonaut Inn and Art Center in Jackson. It was nestled on a slope overlooking the city in a building constructed at the turn of the century. The structure was used to house the business offices and boarding quarters for visiting directors of the old Argonaut mine. Over the years, Mrs. Sinclair's cooking, variously described as continental, country French, and abstract expressionism, was frequently praised by the restaurant critics throughout the state. It gained its high esteem even though Mrs. Sinclair shunned several traditions of the trade. The inn didn't have a bar, didn't have any menus. The nightly choice was simply chalked on a blackboard nailed to the entrance. The Cafe Gallery also served as home for students and aspiring artists. They would swap their services as kitchen aid, table setters, gardeners, and waiters and waitresses for room and board. The relaxed and flexible schedule allowed them the freedom to pursue painting, sculpture, writing, composing, and other artistic interests. Okay.
I was recently widowed. I purchased the structure and 3 acres of land in April of 1969 and opened for business that Labor Day weekend. I never knew from one day to the other what I would serve to my dinner customers. Sometimes I'd lie awake at night thinking about it. Usually the inn offered 2 or 3 entrees daily. I had no real recipes. I made soups, salads, entrees, and desserts from what was growing fresh in the garden or available from the local purveyors. I would prepare the dishes differently each time. A common entree was called chicken argonaut, which I would jot down whenever I planned to serve chicken that night, but I had not yet made up my mind how to prepare it. It could be different each time. And I had created unexpected pairings like liver with peach chutney. That was the fun of having this kind of restaurant. Most people have restaurants to make money. I had a restaurant to express myself. My inn was perched in a bucolic hillside sitting on the north edge of the community, providing an expansive view of the gold rush settlement. Diners sat on the deck, appreciating the view, and drank complimentary wine and waited for a table. There were only 14 tables, so reservations were almost always a must. The restaurant drew most of its customers from San Francisco area, Sacramento, and Stockton. My penchant for cooking without recipes was just one of the many rules I broke. Locals thought me much too eccentric. They preferred consistency, something I just was not willing to offer. My longing to be creative always prompted me to break from the established path in another respect, too. 2 years after I opened the inn, I banned beef from the menu entirely. Selections. After finding that 85% of the customers would order the beef entree, exhausting that selection while leaving the other dishes I had prepared to create. They could go elsewhere and eat that. I always included a lamb or pork roast for conservative eaters or those on diets, always something for vegetarians, and the last concoction was something I just, put together. veal something or other, chicken something or other, pork something or other. The vegetarian dishes were far more fun to prepare than boring roast. I included also seafood with eggs. I was inspired in large part by the seasonal availability of certain foods. Often I'd stop at roadside stands or specialty stores while driving between my ranch on the Mendocino coast and Jackson to stock up on bountiful foods. My cuisine has been variously described as continental or country French. I avoided labeling it. I preferred to think of it as uniquely mine. First-time diners were surprised to be served their salad between the entree and dessert. I did it to give the palate a breather. To go from the multiplicity of flavors in the entree directly into the extremely rich desserts is asking a lot of the stomach and palate. We had some customers who didn't like it because it's not what they were accustomed to. I have to admit that cooking without recipes causes a little unevenness in our output, but which I could do very little unless I became conventional. I suppose one shouldn't experiment in a restaurant, but we did. The inn's most popular desserts were cakes, rich cakes, which I occasionally also prepared, puddings. I love making puddings, but putting something so homey somehow didn't seem to go with the kind of restaurant we were. But when I did make puddings, they were very popular and sold out right away. Each table had a unique setting, sometimes chosen for a particular guest. Vintage china, antique sterling, and heirloom glassware were used daily, despite their value. I believe in using what I had. It's no use leaving it in the cupboard. The most hectic job was teaching the new help how to set the tables. There were 24 place settings that had to be committed to memory. It was like leading an orchestra to get that place going and keeping it looking that way throughout the evening. And there was inevitable dish breakage. It cost me $1,500 to $2,000 a year to replace. The inn closed abruptly in 1977. A fire erupted in a meat smoker in which a pork roast had been prepared for dinner and destroyed the approximately 80-year-old rambling wood structure. The smoker was adjacent to the kitchen wall, which burst into flames when grease in the smoker virtually exploded. The flames spread so rapidly and intensely about the kitchen that the three of us in the building were unable to grab either the telephone or 3 fire extinguishers. The fire, which leveled the inn, also consumed stained glass, windows, paintings, pottery, and other artwork displayed and on sale in the center. In addition, an aspiring composer lost the musical scores he had written over the past several months, and a hopeful writer lost the manuscript he had been preparing to publish. The ashes also contained the remnants of my heirloom antique silver, linens, china, and stemware. As the fire swept the inn, most of its resident artists appeared stunned. Those who didn't stay in the inn proper lived in converted outbuildings. I was unable to watch, secluded myself in one of the small cottages, fretting about the guests who were expected for dinner the next night.
Thank you so much. So luckily she did leave not 1 but 2 cookbooks. They have recipes in it that I don't think she actually cooked. But we're hoping that ACC will allow us to do a demonstration from her cookbook at some point, and also from Miss Tracy's. So now I'd like to introduce Antonina De Castro.
My mother was Rosa de Fonseca. Her family was Jewish, living in Portugal when the Jews were expelled in the late 1400s. They converted to Christianity and stayed in Portugal for generations, though they secretly maintained their Jewish customs and kept kosher during Passover, as best they could. In the 1850s, they joined other family members who had immigrated to Livorno, Italy, and started a Jewish enclave there. Her father was trained as a kosher butcher, so it was easy for him to get a job in New York when they moved there in 1938. They could see the handwriting on the wall. The Germans were moving against the Jews, and so was Mussolini. His brother had already moved to Sacramento to work for the Meta Brothers Deli downtown. There was a kosher deli next door that looked like a promising place for a kosher butcher. There were no openings, so he went to work for Meta Brothers. My father, Manny, had lived in Venice, Italy. It became the major publishing center for Hebrew and Yiddish books. He was a printer. He could also tell the country was growing fascist, and he escaped before he could be expelled, or worse. He was able to get a job at the Sacramento Bee as a typographer. His family scattered all around the world, many of them returning to Portugal after the war. Some of them stayed in Italy and didn't survive. He moved to Southside Park, which is where my parents met. My grandfather had started to work as a kosher butcher in the neighborhood, and my father came in at least twice a week. The butcher thought he looked like a good prospect for his daughter Rosa, so my grandfather arranged a meeting. They were married within a few months and bought a small place at 6th and T Streets, just down the street from my grandparents. It was ideal. The neighborhood was made up of various immigrant cultures, including Italian, Portuguese, Japanese, Chinese, Mexican, and African American. So we fit right in. My father was making enough money that my mother didn't have to work. But after 3 kids, she was going stir-crazy and decided to work in the canneries with the other women. Her Hebrew, Portuguese, and Italian were impeccable, but she just couldn't master English, so it was nice to work with others where language wasn't a barrier. She worked as a tomato sorter or sorted peaches or asparagus when in season at the Libby McNeil and Libby Cannery on Alhambra Boulevard, all throughout the late 1950s and 60s. She also nurtured a small plot of land in our backyard and would grow tomatoes and basil, peppers and zucchini, and then sell them at the farmer's market at 30th or so and S Streets. Just before Passover, she would hold cooking classes for other Portuguese, Italian, or Sephardic families. Not that there were many Sephardic Jews in Sacramento, certainly not at B'nai Israel. I remember the first time someone invited me to their house and served me lox, bagels, and cream cheese, and potato latkes with sour cream and applesauce. I was unfamiliar with any of it. My favorite meal was albondigas. Although albondigas in Spanish it means meatball, the term is also used to describe one or more versions of Sephardic-style matzo balls, a meatless dish which is typically served as part of a Passover meal. Berenjena con miel starts with slices of eggplant, which are fried and then drizzled with honey and salt and served hot. Natillas de arroz con leche, a rice pudding flavored with rose, cinnamon, and rosemary, was my favorite dessert. Staccato is a typical Jewish Roman cooking dish, slowly roasted meat with tomato sauce that could sit for hours during Shabbat dinner. About the only thing that could pass as Italian, Portuguese, and American Ashkenazi Jewish homes was almond macaroons, made with almond meal, egg whites, salt, vanilla, and powdered sugar. I knew I wanted to go on to college and become a teacher, so I took waitressing jobs with flexible hours and enrolled at Sac State. First at Mario's Cellar, a great Italian restaurant at 18th and L, and later at Machiavelli's near 8th and J, which was even closer. That's where I met Lorraine D'Alessandro and her daughter Toni. They had come in for lunch. Lorraine was Portuguese but had married an Italian-American photographer, Americo D'Alessandro. She had worked as a catering manager with the Elks Club and had an ice cream parlor on J Street. She and Americo started a restaurant in Midtown with their son Paul and other family members. She encouraged me to join the Portuguese Historical Society and get in touch with other people of Portuguese descent in Sacramento. One day, she invited me to dinner at the restaurant. There was a customer she thought I might want to meet. His name was Raul De Castro, a Portuguese Jew whose family had also immigrated to Italy and ended up in Sacramento, but not before first immigrating to Greece. That's where I learned the Passover dish that 3 of us will prepare for you today, sopa de huevos y limón, Sephardic chicken soup with lemon and egg.
Thank you so much. So we're going to be doing a cooking demonstration in just a minute. The recipe for the dish that we're going to be making is going to be online. Sean's going to be putting a link to it. We also have a program that includes everybody's information today. So it's going to take me just a minute to get over there to do the demonstration. So I'm going to ask Kay if you'd get started.
Hi, Kay Sinclair here in one of my most favorite places ever, the kitchen. And we're going to make that lovely soup today with the help from my two friends here, the alter egos.
Thank you. And what you're going to notice is that we're starting off with chicken broth. This is a total cheat. I have to tell you, there's no better way to make broth than to make it with the chicken in it. So this shredded chicken is from just a whole chicken that I put into a pot this morning with just carrots and onions and celery, and it comes up with quite a rich sauce. We're going to be adding some lemon and some egg to it. We're going to start off by teaching you how to temper an egg. So first I'm going to ask Kay if you would go ahead and whip those eggs up.
Be happy to.
Now she's whipping the eggs together. You can actually separate out. Some of the dishes for this would include the whites separate from the yolks, but I didn't see any discernible difference. So we didn't start it that way. So once she's got it pretty whipped up, she's going to be tempering it. And what that means is that if she was just to put the eggs into the broth now, she'd be basically making egg flour soup. Instead, she wants it to blend. So she's going to take a ladle and she's going to just take a little bit of the soup and pour it into the eggs so that they don't turn to scrambled eggs, and then she's going to keep on whipping it. I never know how long to whip it. And there is one thing I didn't think about. We're going to turn this off. I am hoping that this doesn't burn anything. You need to take the broth off of the heat because otherwise it's really going to curdle. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add the egg mixture.
Let me move this just a little bit closer.
Now I have to tell you that that when Antonina gave me this recipe, she does it a little bit differently. She sauteed olive oil, about 1/3 of a tablespoon, with some onions. But again, I didn't feel like chopping this morning. So these are all variable type of dishes. It's still Sephardic. And then when she's done, she's going to go ahead and add the lemon. And this is 1/4 cup of lemon to 4 cups of chicken broth. Again, the recipe is going to be there, and continue to mix it. And again, because if you're breaking a fast from Yom Kippur, although I will ask Antonina because she remembers this better than I do, you aren't supposed to cook until after sundown. So you would have prepared most of this stuff beforehand. And now we're going to add the rice. And then we're going to add the chicken. And again, this is just chicken that was shredded. If you don't feel like doing it this way, you can use this. You can just buy a rotisserie chicken as well. And I might have a little bit, so
This is more than a cup.
that's more than a
I'm
cup.
just going to put that
So
in.
we're just going to
Yeah.
include that. And then, and we didn't bring a spoon, so we can't taste it. It's called the money shot, but guys, we didn't do it at all. By the way, if you have questions, now's the time to ask them. We can answer questions, any of the questions. If we need to bring somebody up, we will, or I'll answer a lot of them. We're now going to take the ladle. In fact, I'll ask Antonina if you would ladle the soup.
It goes on top.
It goes
of the
on the
bowl.
top.
Okay.
Just into a bowl. And then you're just going to garnish that soup with a sliced lemon, a little parsley. So we'll slice the lemon and just float a lemon, unless you've done that on the top, with a lot of parsley. And that's it. Voila. This same dish, by the way, as I said, if you didn't take it off the heat, you make egg flour soup. So it's Chinese. You can also make agrostada, which is you thicken this sauce with a little bit of cornstarch and you pour it over the chicken instead of making a soup. And that's our recipe for the day. So again, if there's any questions that we can answer, we will be putting this up online. We do have a program and additional recipes. So are there any questions from the audience? None?
They're just ready to go have some.
Then what we're going to say is I'm going to ask everybody to come on up. The alter egos, give them a round of applause. They literally did this almost last minute. We did one run through on Zoom and that was it, and then showed up today. We just like this way of being able to tell stories that people are able to give their personal narratives. Delta will break character is the director of the Sacramento History Museum and is an avid oral historian as well. We're hoping to do more programs like this if this is well received. At ACC, we have stories that we've already done. If you have a story, we can make arrangements to actually film your story and then bring that story to life with actors. And are any of you professional actors?
I was paid once.
I'm professionally histrionic. Does that count?
That counts. I have to tell you, I wanted to be a professional actor, but I tried out for Music Circus in 1969. Ted performed the same year, Ted Fong from ACC. We want to thank them again. I was asked to sing off stage because my legs were too fat, and that was almost the end of my career. So again, thank you so much, and to our helpers here at ACC, Sean Hidalgo, Danny Lee, Ted Fong, and Linda Berner, who gave us our teleprompter, and Robert, who was our sous chef. So thank you, and we'll see you sometime in July.